Most of the Ten Commandments are pretty easy to figure out, but what exactly does taking the Lord's name in vain mean? The NIV says, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, but that's not really that much better. That's still a really vague statement, and it hinges upon what the word vain means. Now, the underlined Hebrew word is shav, and the verse literally says, do not take up the Lord's name for shav. Now, shav means something that is empty, useless, meaningless, or without purpose. Now, traditionally, this commandment has been taken to mean that we shouldn't use God's proper name as a swear word, which, to be fair, seems like a really bad idea to begin with. But this worry about what it means to use God's name rightly or wrongly has led people not to speak God's name at all for several thousand years. But there's more going on here than just that. It has to do with what the Bible means when it talks about speaking and naming things. See previous episodes for a discussion on that, links in the description. Because our spirit, our breath is involved every single time we speak. When we speak, it was expected that it would go out and do something. Even if it's just flicker a candle flame or annoy somebody's earlobes, your words go out to do something. And the more powerful a person you are, the more your words can do and the more that your words can affect the world and change things. People would pray to have a spirit like someone else, to have the sort of power that that person has. Like Elisha, when he prayed that he could have a double portion of Elijah's spirit, of Elijah's breath, his whoosh, so that his words could have the same effect as Elijah's did. And names represented the power and authority that somebody had. If you spoke in somebody's name, then you spoke with the authority that they had. That your words went and carried the same weight as the person that you are representing. Your breath was the same as theirs. Your power the same as theirs because you are speaking in their name with their breath, their spirit, their authority and power. The closest that we have to this concept would probably be how people use stop in the name of the law. Now, the word law has no power whatsoever, but the person saying that is saying, I have the authority to speak for the law, and the law says you are in the wrong and should stop. So in that moment, the police officer saying stop in the name of the law is speaking with the authority and the voice of the power of the law. So if we pick up God's name like Deuteronomy and Exodus say, if we speak in God's name, then it means to speak in God's voice, with God's power and with God's authority. Because it would mean that God's breath, God's whoosh, is in us. The problem would be if someone takes up God's name and says that they are speaking in God's name with God's authority, and yet nothing happens. They have nothing to back it up. God's spirit, God's breath isn't in those words. That it's claiming God's authority, but none of God's power shows up. None of God's truth shows up. That's a problem, right? Well, that's exactly what we see in Scripture. Lamentations 2:14 says, the visions of your prophets were false. That's shav again. And worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The oracles they gave you were false, shav, and misleading. These prophets' visions were shav because they had no power, they had no truth, they didn't come true. Therefore, they are shav. They are empty. They are worthless. They are useless. Exactly the term that's used in the Ten Commandments. Ezekiel 13:6 says something very similar. Their visions are false, shav, and their divinations a lie. They say, the Lord declares, when the Lord has not sent them, yet they expect their words to be fulfilled. Have you not seen false, again, shav, visions, and uttered lying divinations when you say, the Lord declares, though I have not spoken? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Because of your false, shav, words and lying visions, I am against you. These prophets are taking up God's name, shav, because they are claiming that they are inspired by God, and yet they are not. They are claiming the authority of God, and yet don't have the whoosh of God to back it up. Nothing they say comes true, and God hates that. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. Do not pick up God's name and treat it like shav. Isn't about not saying a word. It's about claiming to be filled with God's whoosh when we aren't. It's about picking up God's name, God's authority, and claiming to speak in that when God never told you to. Because the problem is that people will listen to us if we claim that. And God will get dragged through the mud because we are speaking in God's name when there is no real authority behind it. It is a serious thing to claim that God speaks through us when nothing happens. It is a big deal. It's one of the 10 commandments. So, no, I can't explain televangelists. I can't explain pastors who are constantly saying that God told them this or God told them that, and yet nothing they say comes true. I cannot explain people who claim to speak in God's name and yet don't have any of the Spirit or breath of God. But what they're doing is a problem, and we need to be very careful that we aren't part of that problem too. I hope this video helped you to see taking God's name in vain as part of a larger context into how the Israelites saw speaking and names and words and breaths and all of that wrapped up, as well as how it leads toward inspiration for the rest of the series. But we'll pick up with that again next week. Until then, have a great day. Thanks for watching. See you next video.